Salutations. Today, I'm talking about how studying queerness and religion reveals how queer people create rites and spaces for ourselves. I'll be discussing how creation and transformation extend deeper into our everyday lives, and finish up by asking how we can honor those who make those creations and transformations possible. But first, let's ask the same question. What does queer mean anyway, right? So, that was the center of week 1 of the class Queer Theory, Multi-Religious Perspectives that I took at Star King School for the Ministry last fall. One of the first readings stated that just what queer signifies or includes or refers to is by no means easy to say, which was cited in Queer by Anna Marie Jagos. And, that's no help. All right, so we turn to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. That points out that it could mean people attracted to their own sex and gender, or people attracted to people regardless of sex and gender. Sometimes it's a nice thing to say, sometimes it's, not really a very nice thing to say. So let's go with that. That's a pretty good place to get us on the same page, right? I'll add that queerness seems to be like gardening. Most cultures have a concept of gardening, but when to garden and how to garden and what to garden, where to garden, what's okay to garden and what's not okay to garden, that varies. So queerness, like gardening, I'll say, is a concept that's both widespread and intensely grounded in place, culture, space. Queerness, like that mystery plant that pops up in your garden, can make something extremely surprising. Okay, just letting you know, the plant was a tomato plant, so we have that clear, okay? Great. So, talking about queerness in Christianity, right? I was braced for the usual arguments in class about not eating shrimp while wearing striped polyester clothing. Instead, I read about proposed Christological models of sin and grace posited by Patrick S. Cheng. These looked like the erotic Christ, grace in mutuality and the awareness of being in relationship with one another, in contrast to the sin of just using people selfishly to meet own base gratifications. The out Christ, grace is coming out and being honest about who you are and being true to yourself, in contrast to the sin of hiding who you are for no real reason, not even for your safety. The transgressive Christ, grace as deviance, with sin as the idea of conformity and trying to conform to one single idea of who people should be instead of considering all the ways people could be. And on that note, the hybrid Christ, grace as hybridity and sin as singularity, one way of being. Okay, cool. Surely I'm not going to be so startled again in the next class, right? In the week on paganism, I braced myself for the traditional arguments of the binary divine, with masculinity and femininity and very set roles. Instead, in response to texts on the male goddess movement, I looked to the work of Sidney Eileen, who proposed the divine archetypes of the divine masculine, the divine feminine, but also the divine agender, the divine gender fluid, and the divine intergender, as well as qualities and rituals to honor each of these archetypes. Okay, so by the time I got to week 11, right, I just stopped making any assumptions about anything at all. It just didn't make any point. I simply let myself read through the descriptions of Salvador Vidal Ortiz when he talked about LGBT santeros and the relationships between them and their communities. I learned about how a diasporic religion adapted to a new diaspora. And sure, there was some homophobia, as you might expect. But then I also learned about the different ways that queerness is perceived, about how some chose to reject the American concept of queerness and instead proposed being brilliant, fierce, maricon, and how that looked in their community. transformation. Perhaps messy, perhaps confusing, but transformation within a community. So when I looked back through all of my notes, I noticed the threads of a particular thought that kept coming back again and again. How queer people performed alchemy. How, to borrow the other definition of queer from Merriam-Webster, people who were deemed weird and strange and unconventional took things and made them into something else for them. Whether it's the version of Guadalupe transformed into a Chicana icon, or specific rites transformed for queer people, I learned how people found ways to create and to change. Octavia Butler once wrote in the Earthseed series, "The only last truth is change. God is change." And yet, change isn't easy, right? TikTok and the latest bestsellers would have you believe that change is as simple as step 1, you're going to announce your plan. Step 2, you're going to announce your new action. Step 3, we're not quite sure what step 3 is, but step 4 is going to be profit, for sure. Yeah. Would that it were that simple, right? Change is often messy. It's, 3 steps forward, 6 steps back, and now we're going to just jump sideways. Transformation takes courage to begin as you see what actually is. To finally acknowledge the way you flinch every time someone uses that pronoun. To understand that you'd really rather get some cake instead of going on yet another date. To finally admit that there aren't policies protecting queer people in your workplace. To look at that list of misery, whatever that is for you, that keeps getting longer and longer, and finally saying, enough. Transformation takes faith to even consider the options. To take that first shot of tea and hope you'll like how it turns out, how you turn out. To show up with your partners at that picnic for the first time and say, okay, I hope this will work. To invite someone into your world and tell them a little bit more about you. Transformation takes strength to keep the action going. To keep going even when someone tells you, it's just so wonderful that you and your roommate are so close. To keep finding joy in the face of people literally telling you, you don't exist, even when you're standing right in front of them. To show up to protests with your feet tired and aching, but you're still determined to be there. Transformation takes resources to make it possible. And when we say resources, we tend to think money, but that's not all that it is. It's sharing your tea-versary cupcakes with your coworkers at lunch, or swinging on a bench in summer with your besties, discussing voice training workshops. It's getting up and lifting weights and doing yoga, even though you really don't want to, so that you can stay strong and keep going. And sometimes, transformation can feel like too much. Just way too much. But the important thing to remember is, as we transform, as we find that point that we want to change, we are never doing this alone. We are never doing this alone. As we saw, queer people have always created spaces for ourselves, created rituals, and created rites. So when we feel alone and afraid, we can look to the words of James Baldwin, Audre Lorde, Octavia Butler, Janelle Monáe. When we say, I'm not sure how to honor my top surgery, we might look to Eli Lolliot, the gender doula. Or we might look to trans voice teachers like Renee Yoxon. When we think, I have no idea how to be like this in my community, we might look around and think, I wish that I could be as strong and as fearless as Dee Dee Winston. When we think, help, I just need help, we can look to the ancestors, to, as L.A. Lolliot says, the transcestors, to deities, to the world that has created us. And when we do that, we thank them. We give them the resources that they need to keep surviving as well. We give them honor, we give them money, we give them love, we give them appreciation, we give them everything that we all need to keep going. Today, whether you are queer or not, I ask you to think about how you can transform yourself, your community, and your own world in one small way. And as you do this, I ask you to think about how you can honor, love, and support all those who have come before you, who exist with you, and who will come after you in this continual web of transformation. With that, may it be so, blessed be, Asheo, and of course, happy Pride.